Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. This time we're diving deep into Ries's The Lean Startup, how today's entrepreneurs use continuous innovation to create radically successful businesses. This book has practically become like a Bible for startups and anyone looking to innovate, and for good reason.
Yeah, it's true. What's fascinating about the lean startup is how it takes these principles from manufacturing, specifically the Toyota production system, and
Yeah.
applies them to the world of startups. This blend of seemingly like disparate fields is what makes the book so unique and insightful.
Okay, so let's give our listeners like a bit of an overview. The Lean Startup centers around this idea of validated learning, where you're constantly testing your assumptions about your product or service.
Right. It's not about intuition or hunches. It's about running experiments to gather real-world data and then adapting your strategy based on what you learned. Ries challenges the traditional build it and they will come mentality and encourages entrepreneurs to build something people actually want, not just what they think people want.
And a key part of that is this idea of the minimum viable product, or MVP, which is basically the simplest version of your product that you can use to get feedback from customers.
Exactly. And then based on that feedback, you decide whether to pivot or persevere. Either change direction based on what you've learned or keep going with your current strategy. It's all about staying flexible and responsive to what the market is telling you. The book is packed with real-world examples of startups that have succeeded using this approach, as well as cautionary tales of those that failed because they didn't embrace these principles.
So let's dive into the book itself. Ries starts off by sharing his own story of failure with his first startup, IMVU. He had a great team, funding, and technology, but the product still flopped.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark example of how, even with all the right ingredients, a startup can fail if it doesn't focus on validated learning. They built what they thought was a cool product, but it turned out customers didn't really need or want it.
And this failure was a major turning point for Ries. It made him question everything he thought he knew about entrepreneurship and led him to develop the lean startup methodology.
He realized that building a successful startup, it's not just about having a great idea, it's about having a system for learning what customers actually want as quickly and efficiently as possible.
This leads him to define a startup as a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. I love that definition because it emphasizes just how much guesswork is involved in the early stages of any new venture.
Right, you rarely have all the answers when you're starting out. And that's why the lean startup methodology is so important. It provides a framework for navigating that uncertainty and making smarter decisions, based on data rather than assumptions.
So let's talk about validated learning in more detail. Ries argues that traditional market research and business planning can be misleading, especially for startups. Why is that?
Because they often rely on predictions about the future, which can be wildly inaccurate, especially in rapidly changing markets. The lean startup, on the other hand, encourages you to get out of the building and test your assumptions in the real world.
One of the tools he introduces for doing this is the build, measure, learn feedback loop. Can you explain how that works?
It's essentially a cycle of building a minimum viable product, measuring its performance using actionable metrics, and then learning from the data to make improvements. The goal is to iterate quickly and constantly refine your product based on customer feedback.
So it's not about spending months or years developing a perfect product in isolation. It's about getting something out there quickly and then adapting based on how people actually use it.
Exactly. And that's where the MVP comes in. Rizri stresses that an MVP is not a half-baked product, but rather a strategic tool for testing your key assumptions about what customers want.
And he gives several examples of different types of MVPs, like the concierge MVP used by Food on the Table.
Right. They manually provided a service to their first customers before building any software. This allowed them to gather valuable feedback and validate their business model without investing heavily in development.
And there's the famous Dropbox Video MVP, where they created a simple video demonstrating the product's value proposition before actually building the full-fledged service.
It's a great example of how you can test your core assumptions with something relatively quick and inexpensive. The goal is to get just enough information to decide whether to keep going or change direction.
And that brings us to one of the core concepts of the lean startup, the pivot or persevere moment.
It's a critical decision point where entrepreneurs have to evaluate the data they've collected and decide whether to continue with their current strategy or make a significant change. This can be a tough call, especially if you've invested a lot of time and resources in your initial idea.
Ries provides several examples of startups that have successfully pivoted, like Groupon, which started as a platform for collective activism before shifting to group buying deals.
And there are countless examples of companies that failed because they were too stubborn to pivot. Blockbuster is a classic case. They ignored the rising threat of Netflix and clung to their brick-and-mortar business model, even when it was clear that the market was shifting online.
These stories really underscore the importance of being data-driven and adaptable in the face of uncertainty. Another key theme in the book is the idea of innovation accounting.
Ries argues that traditional accounting methods don't work well for startups because they focus on measuring past performance rather than predicting future outcomes. Innovation accounting, on the other hand, is designed to help startups track their progress toward validated learning.
So instead of just looking at revenue or profit, you're looking at things like how many experiments you've run, what you've learned from those experiments, and how that's informing your product development.
Exactly. It's a more nuanced and dynamic way of measuring progress that aligns with the iterative nature of the lean startup methodology.
One of the metrics that Ries recommends tracking is the learning milestone, which is a measurable goal that helps you determine whether you're on the right track.
He also emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between actionable metrics and vanity metrics. Vanity metrics might sound impressive, like the number of website hits or downloads, but they don't necessarily measure real progress toward your business goals.
A great example of this is Wealthfront's initial success with their Kaching game. They had impressive user numbers, but ultimately had to pivot because those numbers didn't translate into their intended business model.
It's a reminder that you need to focus on metrics that are directly tied to your startup's growth engine.
Ries also draws inspiration from the Toyota production system, applying the principles of small batch production and continuous deployment to the world of startups.
He argues that working in small batches allows you to learn faster and iterate more effectively. And continuous deployment, where code changes are released into production as soon as they're ready, enables you to get feedback from customers in real time.
He highlights IMVU's immune system for software deployment, where they were able to release updates multiple times per day, minimizing risk and maximizing learning.
It's a great example of how you can create a culture of continuous improvement and innovation within your organization. But it's not just about the technical aspects of like building and releasing products. Rees emphasizes that building a lean startup culture is crucial for long-term success.
Right. He talks about the dangers of the large batch death spiral, where companies get bogged down in bureaucracy and lose their ability to move quickly and adapt to change.
Yeah, it's a recipe for stagnation. To avoid this, Rees advocates for a more decentralized structure, one that empowers individuals and teams to make decisions and experiment without fear of failure. He believes that a startup is not simply like a smaller version of a large company. It's a fundamentally different kind of organization.
That makes sense. The challenges and opportunities facing a startup are unique, so their structure and culture should reflect that.
Yeah, one of the things that really resonated with me was Rees's discussion of the leap of faith that every entrepreneur takes.
What does he mean by that?
It's that inherent uncertainty you face when you start a new venture. You're essentially betting on a set of untested assumptions about the market, your product, and your customers, and there's always the risk that those assumptions will prove to be wrong.
So how do you navigate that leap of faith in a way that minimizes risk?
Rees argues that it's all about testing those assumptions as quickly and efficiently as possible. He encourages entrepreneurs to view their business plan as experiments that need to be rigorously tested and refined.
One of the examples he uses is Facebook in its early days.
Uh-huh.
Their growth was phenomenal, but even they had to make a lot of assumptions about how users would engage with the platform.
Right. And those assumptions could have easily been wrong. But by constantly testing and iterating, they were able to stay ahead of the curve and build a product that people love.
Ries also cautions against relying too heavily on analogies when justifying those leaps of faith. While analogies can be helpful for explaining complex ideas, they can also be misleading if you're not careful.
He uses the example of a revised statement about a new software product that avoids analogies and instead focuses on the key assumptions that need to be tested. It's a great illustration of how to be more precise and rigorous in your thinking about your business.
Another story that really stood out to me was about the development of the Toyota Sienna minivan. Yuji Yokoya, the chief engineer, went on a 53,000-mile road trip across North America to better understand the needs of minivan customers.
Oh, wow, that's commitment. It's a fantastic example of how important it is to get out of the building and talk to your customers directly. Yokoya could rely on market research or focus groups, but there's no substitute for firsthand experience.
And it's not just about gathering data, it's about empathy. By putting himself in the shoes of his customers, Yokoya was able to develop a product that truly met their needs.
Ries also stresses the importance of early contact with customers. He suggests creating a customable archetype, which is basically like a detailed profile of your ideal customer.
This helps you to focus your product development efforts and ensure that you're building something that people actually want.
Moving on to the test section of the book, Ries dives into the importance of building and testing MVPs. He emphasizes that the goal is to quickly test fundamental business hypotheses, focusing on what customers truly value, not necessarily on delivering a perfect product.
Right. The MVP is all about validated learning. It's about getting something out there quickly, even if it's rough around the edges, to see how people respond to it.
He shares the story of Groupon, which started with a simple WordPress blog and a pizza coupon to validate their group buying concept. They didn't need a fancy platform or a team of engineers to get started. They just needed to test their idea in the real world.
It's a great example of how you can start small and build your way up as you learn more about your customers and the market.
Ries also clarifies that first products aren't meant to be perfect. He explains the distinction between early adopters and mainstream customers, highlighting that early adopters are more forgiving of imperfections and are eager to experience the novelty of a new product or service.
It's an important point because a lot of entrepreneurs get hung up on trying to create a perfect product from the start. But perfection is often the enemy of progress, especially in the early stages of a startup.
Yeah, he uses IMVU's initial buggy product as an example, illustrating how attracting early adopters is crucial for validating the core value proposition before focusing on achieving mass market appeal.
I think Dropbox is another great example of this. They used a video MVP to gauge customer interest in their file syncing service. It was simple, but it effectively communicated the value proposition and allowed them to validate their idea before investing heavily in development.
Those early adopters are your most valuable asset. They're the ones who are willing to give you feedback, help you to identify bugs, and spread the word about your product.
But even with a great MVP, you still need a way to measure your progress and make data-driven decisions about whether to pivot or persevere. That's where innovation accounting comes in.
Ries argues that traditional accounting metrics don't work well for startups because they focus on measuring past performance rather than predicting future outcomes. Innovation accounting, on the other hand, is designed to help startups track their progress toward validated learning.
One of the key aspects of innovation accounting is setting learning milestones, which are different from traditional business milestones. Learning milestones are focused on validating key business hypotheses, rather than achieving arbitrary deadlines or delivering features.
This approach ensures that the startup is continuously learning and adapting based on real-world evidence. It's not about checking boxes. It's about gaining insights that will help you build a successful business.
One of the things I really appreciate about Ries's writing is that he doesn't shy away from addressing the anxieties that many entrepreneurs face. For example, he talks about the fear of exposing your idea to competitors. If you release an MVP too early,
Yeah, it's a valid concern. But Ries argues that the speed of learning is a startup's biggest advantage. By releasing an MVP and gathering feedback quickly, you can outmaneuver larger, slower-moving competitors.
he also addresses the concern that releasing an imperfect product might damage a company's brand.
But he counters that by emphasizing the importance of transparency and engaging early adopters in the feedback loop. By being open about your development process, you can actually build stronger relationships with your customers and create a more loyal following.
Another potential pitfall that Ries highlights is the large batch death spiral. This occurs when companies work on large batches of work, leading to slower feedback loops, increased risk of errors, and reduced agility.
He advocates for using a Kanban system, which promotes small batches of work and continuous deployment, enabling faster learning cycles and a more responsive approach to product development.
He shares a case study about Grocket, a test preparation company, demonstrating how they successfully transitioned to a small batch approach using Kanban. This shift resulted in dramatic improvements in their development process, allowing them to release features more frequently and gather feedback more efficiently.
It's a reminder that even small changes in your process can have a big impact on your overall efficiency and ability to learn and adapt.
Ries then cautions against the allure of vanity metrics, which might look impressive on the surface, but don't necessarily correlate with real progress toward a sustainable business.
He uses the example of Wealthfront's Kaching game, which initially boasted impressive user numbers, but ultimately failed to translate into their intended business model. It's a classic example of how you can be fooled by metrics that don't tell the whole story.
He emphasizes the importance of using actionable, accessible, and auditable metrics that are directly tied to the startup's key growth drivers.
These metrics should be easy for everyone on the team to understand and provide clear insights into the effectiveness of the startup's efforts.
Ries then dives into the concept of pivoting, which is essentially a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about your product, strategy, or engine of growth. He argues that pivoting is not a sign of failure, but rather a sign of a company's willingness to adapt and learn.
He provides several examples of different types of pivots, including the zoom-in pivot, where a single feature of the product becomes the entire product, the zoom-out pivot, where what was previously considered the whole product becomes a single feature of a much larger product, and the customer segment pivot, where the company realizes it is building the right product but for the wrong customer.
He also talks about pivoting your customer need, your platform, your business architecture, your value capture mechanism, your engine of growth, your channel, and even your technology.
Wow, that's a lot of pivoting. It's really about being open to changing anything and everything about your business if the data tells you to do so.
One of the most compelling stories in the book is about David Benetti and his company, Vodison. Benetti was willing to pivot multiple times based on validated learning, and this ultimately led to a successful outcome. It's a great example of how flexibility and adaptability can be the key to success in the uncertain world of startups.
In part 3 of the book, Accelerate, Ries shifts his focus to strategies and tactics for accelerating growth. Once a startup has found product market fit, he draws heavily on principles from the Toyota production system, particularly the ideas of small batches and continuous deployment.
He opens this section by highlighting the importance of speed and agility for startups, using the analogy of stuffing envelopes to illustrate the benefits of working in small batches.
Smaller batches lead to faster feedback loops, reduced rework, and improved overall efficiency. And that speed is crucial in the early stages of a startup when you're trying to learn and adapt as quickly as possible.
He then explores the history of the Toyota production system, showing how their embrace of small batches and continuous improvement revolutionized manufacturing. The key takeaway is that these same principles can be applied to startups and other innovative organizations.
And he's not just talking about software companies. Ries provides examples of how small batches have been successfully implemented in a variety of settings, from healthcare and education to manufacturing and even government.
One of the most striking examples is how IMVU applied these principles to their software development process, creating what Ries calls an immune system. That allowed them to release updates multiple times per day with minimal risk of errors.
It's a testament to how a well-designed system can enable incredible speed and efficiency.
Continuous deployment is another key concept in this section. It's the practice of automatically releasing code changes into production as soon as they're ready, which can dramatically accelerate the feedback loop and allow for more rapid iteration.
A lot of people worry about the risks associated with continuous deployment. But Ries argues that with the right safeguards and automated testing, it can actually lead to higher quality and faster delivery.
He also discusses the factors driving the trend towards continuous deployment, including advancements in hardware and software development tools, as well as the rise of cloud computing.
These advancements have made it easier and less risky for companies to release software updates more frequently, which is essential for staying competitive in today's fast-paced world.
To further illustrate the power of small batches, Ries shares the story of SGW DesignWorks, a company that specializes in rapid production techniques for physical products.
They were able to dramatically reduce the development time for a complex X-ray system by using 3D modeling, rapid prototyping, and a small batch production approach.
It's a great example of how these principles can be applied beyond the world of software.
Ries then tackles a common misconception, the belief that larger batches are more efficient. He argues that this belief is based on outdated notions of specialization and the idea that individual workers are more productive when they can focus on a single task without interruptions.
But as he points out, larger batches often lead to a cascade of negative consequences, including increased rework, delays, and that large batch death spiral we talked about earlier.
It's all about finding the sweet spot between efficiency and responsiveness. And in most cases, smaller batches are the way to go.
Ries advocates for a pull system, borrowed from the Toyota production system, where work is pulled through the system based on demand, rather than being pushed through in large batches. This minimizes waste and maximizes efficiency.
He provides a really clear example of the pull system in action at a car dealership. A simple signal, like a customer needing a specific car part, can trigger a chain reaction that results in the production of that part without creating excess inventory.
It's a beautifully elegant system, and it highlights how even seemingly complex processes can be streamlined and made more efficient.
He also shares the story of Alphabet Energy, a clean technology company that developed a thermoelectric material that can generate electricity from waste heat. They embraced a pull-based approach by designing their product development process around the needs of their early adopters.
Let's allow them to test their assumptions and gather feedback before investing in large-scale production, which is a key principle of the lean startup methodology.
Ries concludes this section by emphasizing that building a sustainable organization capable of sustained innovation requires a fundamental shift in culture.
He argues that the lean startup is not just about tools and techniques, but about creating a mindset of experimentation, learning, and continuous improvement.
He introduces a framework called the Startup Way, which outlines the key elements needed to build a sustainable and innovative culture. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels empowered to contribute their ideas and to challenge the status quo.
This framework emphasizes the importance of people, culture, process, and accountability. It's really a roadmap for organizations that are serious about embracing the principles of a lean startup.
In the Grow chapter, Ries tackles this challenge of scaling growth once a startup has found product-market fit. He cautions against premature scaling, which happens when startups try to grow too quickly without truly understanding their engine of growth. This can lead to wasted resources and hinder long-term success.
It's like putting the cart before the horse. You need to have a solid foundation in place before you can start scaling aggressively.
Exactly. Ries emphasizes the importance of validated learning as a prerequisite for sustainable growth. Startups need to constantly test their assumptions about customer acquisition and refine their growth strategies based on real-world data.
So even when you're in growth mode, you can't stop experimenting and learning.
Absolutely. He then breaks down the three primary engines of growth: the sticky engine, the viral engine, and the paid engine.
Can you briefly explain those?
Sure. The sticky engine relies on high customer retention rates. Companies using this focus on providing exceptional customer service, building a strong brand, and creating a product that's hard to leave. The viral engine, on the other hand, leverages word-of-mouth marketing and network effects. Think of companies like Facebook or Instagram where users naturally invite their friends. Finally, the paid engine relies on advertising and other paid marketing channels. These companies need to carefully track their customer acquisition costs to make sure their marketing spend is profitable.
It's interesting to think about which engine of growth is most appropriate for different types of businesses. And it probably changes over time too.
Definitely. Understanding your engine of growth is crucial for making informed decisions about how to allocate resources and scale your business effectively.
In the Adapt chapter, Ries shifts his focus to organizational structure and how it can either help or hinder a startup's progress. He argues that traditional hierarchical structures, common in large corporations, are often too slow and inflexible for the fast-paced world of startups.
Yeah, it's like trying to steer a speedboat with the rudder of a cargo ship. You need to be able to turn quickly and adjust to changing conditions.
He advocates for a more adaptable and decentralized structure that empowers individuals and teams to make decisions and experiment without fear of failure. He introduces this concept of the startup as an organization, emphasizing that a startup isn't just a smaller version of a large company. It's a fundamentally different kind of entity that needs to be designed for learning and adaptation.
He draws parallels between the challenges faced by entrepreneurs and the challenges faced by large organizations attempting to innovate, arguing that the principles of the lean startup can be applied in both contexts.
So whether you're a small startup or a large corporation, you can benefit from embracing a more agile and experimental approach.
Exactly. One of the key challenges that startups face is managing the transition from an early stage, where speed and agility are paramount, to a later stage, where structure and process become increasingly important.
It's a classic growing pain. How do you maintain that entrepreneurial spirit while scaling your operations?
Ries argues that this transition doesn't have to be painful. It's about finding the right balance. He provides examples of companies that have successfully navigated this transition by building a strong culture, empowering employees, and staying focused on validated learning.
He also delves into the concept of intrapreneurship, which is the practice of applying entrepreneurial principles within an established organization. It's about creating a space for innovation and experimentation within the structure of a larger company.
It's a great way for large companies to tap into the creativity and energy of their employees and to avoid becoming stagnant and bureaucratic.
One of the key takeaways from this chapter is that innovation is not a top-down process. It requires participation from everyone in the organization.
Right. The best ideas often come from the people who are closest to the customers and the problems that need to be solved. By empowering employees at all levels to experiment and take risks, you can unlock a tremendous amount of innovation.
In the Innovate chapter, Ries tackles this challenge of sustaining a culture of innovation over the long term. He acknowledges that this is something that many companies struggle with, especially as they grow and become more risk-averse.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into the trap of focusing on short-term profits and efficiency at the expense of long-term innovation. But as Rees points out, that's a recipe for eventual decline.
So how do you avoid that trap? How do you create a culture that embraces innovation even as your company grows and matures?
Rees emphasizes the importance of creating a feedback loop between the company and its customers, constantly gathering feedback and using it to improve products and services. It's about staying connected to the market and adapting to changing customer needs.
One of the key challenges in sustaining innovation is overcoming the fear of failure. In many organizations, failure is seen as a sign of weakness or incompetence.
But Rees argues that failure is an essential part of the innovation process. You have to be willing to experiment, knowing that some of your experiments will inevitably fail. The key is to learn from those failures and use those learnings to improve your next attempt.
It's about creating a safe space for experimentation, where people feel comfortable taking risks and trying new things, even if those things don't always work out.
He introduces the concept of blameless postmortems, which are meetings held after a project or experiment has failed, to identify the root causes of the failure and learn from the experience without assigning blame.
It's about creating a culture of learning, not a culture of punishment.
Ries also emphasizes the importance of celebrating small wins. He argues that companies should recognize and reward employees who are taking risks and experimenting, even if those experiments don't always succeed. This helps to create a positive feedback loop where employees are encouraged to continue innovating.
It's a good reminder that innovation doesn't always have to be about big disruptive breakthroughs. Sometimes it's about making small incremental improvements over time.
One of the most insightful concepts Ries introduces is the innovation sandbox. This is a dedicated space, either physical or virtual, where employees can experiment with new ideas without having to go through the normal bureaucratic processes.
It's about giving people the freedom and autonomy to explore new ideas without fear of being stifled by red tape.
Exactly. Ries also argues that companies need to be willing to pivot, not just at the product level, but at the organizational level as well. As your company grows and the market changes, you may need to adapt your strategy, structure, and even your core values.
It's about staying flexible and being willing to change course when necessary, and that can be tough for organizations that are used to doing things a certain way.
He challenges the traditional notion of the CEO as the sole visionary leader, arguing that innovation should not be limited to the executive suite. He believes companies should create mechanisms for capturing and amplifying the ideas of employees at all levels. One way to do this is through innovation teams, cross-functional groups of employees tasked with identifying and developing new ideas.
It's about creating a culture of innovation that permeates the entire organization, not just the top levels.
He also discusses the role of the board of directors in fostering a culture of innovation, arguing that boards should be actively involved in the company's innovation strategy and should hold management accountable for results.
In the epilogue, Ries reflects on the broader implications of the lean startup movement and looks ahead to the future of entrepreneurship. He argues that the lean startup is more than just a set of tools and techniques for building businesses. It's a new way of thinking about the world and approaching problems.
He believes the lean startup principles can be applied to any field where there's uncertainty and a need for innovation, from government and education to healthcare and nonprofits.
That's a powerful idea. It suggests that we can apply these principles to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing our society today.
He's particularly excited about the potential for the lean startup to transform large organizations, to help them break down silos, empower employees, and create a more entrepreneurial culture.
It's about injecting a dose of innovation and agility into organizations that might otherwise become slow and bureaucratic.
Ries concludes by calling on readers to join the lean startup movement and contribute to building a better future for entrepreneurship and innovation. He envisions a world where these principles are embedded in every organization, where individuals are empowered to create positive change through experimentation and validated learning.
It's a call to action, a challenge to think differently about the way we approach problems and build solutions.
The Lean Startup is a powerful book, full of practical advice and inspiring stories. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the principles of innovation and how to apply them to their own work and life.
It's a book that has had a profound impact on the world of business and beyond.
Yeah, it's given countless entrepreneurs and innovators the tools and the confidence to pursue their dreams and make a difference in the world.
That was a deep dive. The Lean Startup is certainly packed with insights for anyone who wants to create something new.
It's definitely a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
What stood out to you the most from our discussion today?
For me, it was the emphasis on validated learning. It's such a simple idea, but it's so powerful. It's about constantly testing your assumptions and being willing to adapt based on what you learn. It's a reminder that we don't have all the answers, and that the best way to find those answers is to experiment and get feedback from the real world.
I think that's a great takeaway. It's about embracing uncertainty and seeing failure not as an endpoint, but as a learning opportunity.
The Lean Startup is definitely a book that can change the way you think about building anything new, whether it's a business, a product, or even just a new habit.
We hope this deep dive has given you some inspiration and some practical tools to apply to your own endeavors.
Remember, it's all about testing, learning, iterating, and not being afraid to pivot when the data tells you to.
Until next time, keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep innovating.